This is White Plains Week, the weekly roundup of White Plains, Westchester, and world news. With John Bailey, editor and publisher of the daily internet newspaper White Plains Citizen Net Reporter, WPCNR.com. Jim Benerofe, editor and publisher of SuburbanStreet.com and WhitePlains.com. White Plains Week, what's happening? Who are the newsmakers? What's in store for the future? The views and opinions expressed on this program are solely those of the participants. White Plains Week is presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76, Verizon Fios Channel 45, and on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. Now, White Plains Week.
Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. White Plains, Westchester, and the world. John Bailey with Jim Benerofe, the Dean of the White Plains School of Journalism. Glad to be back and ready for a big election coming up on Tuesday. And Jim, the headlines.
And here are the headlines for the week of November 1st, 2019. Early voting a hit. 1,000 expected to vote early in White Plains. White Plains ready to chart its Common Council for the next 4 years in Tuesday Election Day. House of Representatives votes 232 to 196 to proceed with impeachment of President Trump. Washington Nationals fans boo the president at the ballpark. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos says nation is in a student achievement crisis. 2/3 of nation's children do not meet reading standards. White Plains Week introduces its Shovels in the Ground report, what's going up and what's not going up. County Executive George Latimer promises record capital spending and a property tax cut. Service Employees International Union 32BJ begins negotiations with 35 building owners. Mayor Tom Roach supports their bid for fair wages. The White Plains Rotary Club celebrates its 100th anniversary.
Thank you very much, Jim. And now we go to the White Plains Week video newsreel march of time for November the 1st, just 3 to 4 days before Election Day, Tuesday. And that is the Board of Elections, where a great number of residents are voting early, including yours truly, John Bailey. In fact, you can still have one more day to vote. This program is being taped on Friday, and on Saturday you can still vote early at the Board of Elections, but after that it's all over and you have to wait till Election Day to vote. Now, what happens, Jim, when you go? You did not go, I take it, go to early voting, did you?
No, I didn't go to early voting. I still could go to early voting.
Yes, you could. You could avoid that crowd.
You can tell us how it was.
Yes, exactly. Now, be that as it may. First of all, you walk into the Board of Elections and you're directed into an inner sanctum, which very, very efficient. And then you see this poll book. And no, it's not. That's not the poll book, but that is the great. There it is. The poll book. They ask you your name, and they run it into this poll book, and your name comes up. That means you're registered to vote, and then I have to sign by stylists, and they have a record. They print out a receipt, and then a gentleman hands you the ballot, and you vote just as usual. It was very efficient. There was no questioning, and there was no waiting to find your name in the huge alphabet book, which often takes time. You know, which if you really like that old-fashioned experience, you can have it on Tuesday, on Election Day, when they look through those big books. Always a pleasure standing in line. But it was a very good experience, and I found out as when I voted, I was number 267 on Wednesday on my machine there, and that other machine in the same area had about a couple of hundred. I understand that about 500 had already voted in White Plains alone, not necessarily all White Plains residents, of course. But be that as it may, it looks as if they expect to have 1,000 people vote early at the White Plains Board of Elections for the election. And this, I think, is a real significant number. I also was told that about 1,000, that Yonkers is really big on early voting. They had a tremendous turnout for early voting in Yonkers, which is really interesting. And I think this is a tremendous job by Reginald Lafayette, the Commissioner of the Board of Elections, pulling all this together. I can't tell you how smooth this was. It was the most pleasant voting experience I've ever had.
Well, there's another thing you said to me when we were talking about this that I think we should bring up, and that is that when they have the budget vote for the Board of Elections, the school board budget,
yes,
I think that we should have early voting there also. I think that could make a tremendous difference.
It would put the pressure on to really sell and get out the vote.
Yeah.
Because that is the hardest election to vote in that you will ever vote in, because they only give you 9 hours to vote. That means if you work for a living and you have to get over there either at lunchtime, on your lunch hour if you live in White Plains, or if you're working in the city, Connecticut, wherever, you have to get home by 5, 6 o'clock and then drop on over to wherever the school is where you vote. That is really inconvenient. You're basically limited to about 4 hours if you're a working person of an interval vote. And this has to be looked at because it is an important convenience to get more voters participating in school elections. And that'll be an issue to talk about, won't it?
Yes.
Remember, you heard the suggestion first from White Plains Week, which has been an issue with us for a number of years. The low turnout, only 1,000 people voted in the school board election last year, close to 1,000. 1,000 registered voters. Now, if you could vote early, I think you'd have a lot more. And early voting is going to be here to stay, and next year will be a big test because we have the presidential election and the State House elections. It will be an interesting thing, but it really worked very well. I really liked it. I was ready to just jump on it, but it worked fine. A great job by Reginald Lafayette to train the staff and get the poll books in so that they actually worked and there was no scrounging around. All right, now turning locally to the elections, we have, of course, the last-minute election flyers coming out. That's the Democratic slate. Now, I did not get one from the Republican slate. And then, 2 weeks ago, Jim, we had the League of Women Voters Forum shown here from the video shot by the White Plains Community Media, which also produces this program, and you can see that on the White Plains CommunityMedia.org website in its entirety. And one thing I want to say, I could not attend this, and I read some accounts of it, but what intrigues me is the trouble with the format they use, Jim, is that they really don't encourage the candidates to come forth. What would you do for White Plains? Like a little platform or something?
Yeah.
They don't. What do you think about the format? I think it's high time it got changed and got a little more issue-centered.
Well, what I want to do with elections, not only local but national, that I would say that each candidate has to put out a platform book.
Yes, wouldn't that be nice?
so that we can really know what each candidate stands for.
Yes, what they stand for, what they think might be done, and they answer questions about policies, and many of them, it's obvious, haven't really been doing their homework across the board. I mean, and to my way of thinking, this is what is wrong. You can't, we are electing 3 probably new people to the Common Council, two new people. It's going to change the makeup, and they're coming into a really crucial time for White Plains, don't you think? And they have to pay attention and start learning those issues right away when they are, if they should win. They can't take a day off after November the 5th, because they've really got to explore the issues and find out what they're talking about. And now, next slide, please. That was this morning's New York Times headline, Jim. Do you want to make a comment on that? This is a historic headline.
Well, I think that they're proceeding correctly. This does not mean that they are actually going to impeach the president, but they have formally said that they are.
They're proceeding with the inquiry, peeling the onion, so to speak. And however, this week had an unprecedented event in World Series icons. When the 5th game of the World Series was played, and I did not see any of the games because I was out of the area, and in the pregame ceremonies in Game 5, this happened. I've never, ever seen a nationally televised event where, when the president was introduced, he was met with a really vigorous, mixed response at best. There was very loud booing, which is shocking, and it was spontaneous. His picture went up on the scoreboard, and all of a sudden, the crowd's mood just changed. And it's worth noting. And it's also one of the great things about democracy, because it was democracy in action. People voiced their expressions about whether they liked or disliked whoever, the leader that was being introduced. And that isn't often tolerated in dictatorships around the world. In fact, you could get arrested in some of them. Now, another thing that happened in Washington this week, it appeared in the page 17 of the New York Times, and that was this story. Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, announced results of a national test which the Education Department administers every 2 years, and she announced that we are in a student achievement crisis because it reflected the performance of about 600,000 students in reading and math whose scores made up what is called the nation's report card, according to the Times article. And what it said was that only 35% of fourth graders were proficient in reading in 2019, down from 37% in 2017, and 34% of eighth graders were proficient in reading, down from 36%. Maybe I'm not too proficient in reading either, but the results are absolutely stunning. This is 2 years after the last national test, and according to the Times article, Ms. DeVos dismissed Democratic presidential candidates' call to increase school funding to improve the worst performing schools. And This is an interesting problem, but it underscores what we have talked about for a long time on this program. And what is your reaction to that? Are we?
Well, I'm an avid reader.
Yes.
I have a huge personal library. I have been on the Library Board Foundation since its inception. I think reading is really, really important, and these percentages are totally unacceptable.
Absolutely.
It's ridiculous that any country like America would have that kind of thing. I think that it would be interesting to see how many kids are proficient in the use of cell phones.
Yeah, it's not funny because cell phones are a major distraction, even crossing the street. Dating. They're dating distraction. You're sitting texting with this beautiful woman across from you who's also texting. You start going out with her, you marry her, and all of a sudden you have nothing to talk about.
Well, you just text.
Yes, so that, but I digress. The problem here is that in White Plains, the number of 8th graders and that are proficient in reading is about 45%. So that's not too hot either. This is supposed to be a great district, and we think it is. But is it really?
I don't know exactly what standards they use for proficiency in reading, but you really need to have proficiency in reading up to around 75%.
Please, yes. Otherwise, you can be told things, but since you can't read about them on your own, because maybe it's too hard for you.
Which reminds me, I just finished a book.
Yes.
That is unreal, and it's been on the bestseller list for 80 weeks or so, and that's Educated by Tara Westover. It is a fascinating memoir. It's one of the best books, if not the best book I've ever read.
Yeah.
And it really is a message to education.
Well, this idea of just constantly throwing more money at education to improve results hasn't worked. I mean, on a national test basis, on a local test basis, and we are really in a bad catch-up ball situation education-wise, and that has to be one of the leading issues, I think, in any presidential campaign. How do we fix it? And it's something that parents everywhere across the nation, locally, have to ask the district, what are we doing? What are we doing to get, at least locally, our score is up over 50% this coming year and up to 55 the next year. Maybe the state can make the tests easier, but that's not the answer. It's not the answer.
You've got to get kids reading books.
Right.
You've got to spend time reading instead of playing with their cell phones.
Yes.
Or playing with games on their computers, whatever it might be.
Yes. I mean, the computer is a marvelous thing, but it has had some really bad side effects.
Yes.
Now, speaking of White Plains High School, Thursday afternoon was a wild time at the high school. This was the scene outside of White Plains High School. Yesterday afternoon, traffic was absolutely at a standstill on North Street. A television van was standing by because White Plains High School was in lockdown. And to the credit of the White Plains Police Department in the city, they put out messages right away explaining what was happening if you could get to the computer to see them, okay? And my feeling and what they reported was apparently there was a call for a lockdown notice that went out by accident.
Yeah.
And so the police and the school district both reacted as if it was really real, because they didn't know. The police got the notice from the way they get it normally and sprung into action. cordoned off the area. They then proceeded to look through the school and check to see if everything was okay. Kids were kept in the classrooms, and then eventually by the late afternoon they determined there was no threat, there were no injuries involved, and no one was hurt. And what is interesting to me is they thought this was real, and everybody reacted, I thought, quite efficiently and professionally to handle this possibility of a threat. It was perhaps one of the best drills, which nobody thought was a drill, ever conducted. Remember how they used to announce fire drills? Yeah. Now, Tom Roach made an appearance at the SEIU beginnings of negotiations with the 35 major business owners, and Mr. Roach, if I can find the little quote here, let's see, yes, Tom Roach spoke at the group along with other politicians, and Mr. Roach said, "The people who clean office buildings are the ones who make it a safe place to work." Tom Roach said, "You need people who know what they're doing, and that's what we have, and you deserve to be fairly compensated for the work you do." I was pleased to see the mayor took a hand in this, because we have had SEIU situations with employers in White Plains, and I don't know if the mayor actually did this, but they were able to persuade the Department of Motor Vehicles not to move into an employer's building who had fired some SEIU workers. So the mayor, of course, is facing negotiations with all the city unions this year. He's got to settle with them, and it is going to be a tough negotiation. I mean, the last time they settled through 2019, 3% was the increase they got on top of the...
What do they get per hour, do you know?
About $15. The unions get $15. But the non-union members that corporations would love to get in there working get far less, maybe 11. It's a big saving. And once again, savings are made on the workers who are not respected. Like, if you don't respect the Teamsters, you have nobody delivering your stuff. And it's an interesting problem with labor negotiations coming up for the city, but tribute to the mayor for at least going up and speaking out to support them. I believe he's one of the only mayors who has. I'm just guessing, but if I'm wrong, I apologize. But mayors should get behind these wholesale, nasty things that corporations do to just cut costs. And coming up next on the show, we have a look at what's going on in a brand new report that we're going to try and do regularly, and that is the Shovels in the Ground report. Here is where the shovels are in the ground and working in White Plains. In the upper left, of course, is the new 2nd Bank Street building, and it is now up to, I believe, 3 stories. 2 weeks ago, it was at only 1. So at 1 floor a week, that should be done by the fall, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Easily. So this Mr. Capelli proceeding with his usual no-nonsense pace. Right. And over on the right, there is a lot of foundation work being done at the corner of Mamaroneck and Post Road. And as you can see, they were sort of, it was very hard to get a good picture, but you can see the foundations are going up. So it looks like those are going to be the 2 developments that will open first, and we will see, and we'll open those doors for the millennials and the empty nesters to come on in and snap up those presumably affordable apartments, right? Now, lower left, this is where nothing is happening. That is the former site of the White Plains Pavilion as it looked yesterday. And we don't see anything really happening. so far with this project. They were cutting it back in size and stature, and now apparently they're waiting for the jing to come on in. Who knows? Do you have any comments about that?
No, I don't know
Yeah.
anything about what's going on there.
No. Well, apparently the city doesn't want to tell us what's going on about it, but it's terrible. That was they tore that down instantaneously, and as far as issues go, this is something new Common Council members that are elected on Tuesday have to really start paying attention to, because they will be asked to approve some projects coming up, and there has to be some discussion of the viability of getting financing for it. Now, that's what the problem has been.
Well, there are a number. There are a number of other buildings that I don't know what the status is. For instance, the old White Plains Hotel.
Yes.
I don't know where that's going.
Yes.
And then the AT&T building, which is, I think, Rose Associates is developing.
Right.
Nothing has happened with that
But
yet.
it's not happening. We try and tell you where work is obviously being done and projects, but that's the point of trying to follow this up. Now,
Nothing's happening with the White Plains Mall either.
no. In fact, that was the first project approved in this new building thing after the Bank Street Commons project started, okay? And now it continues to house tenants, and not much is happening with it. But we'll see. That was supposed to be a cornerstone. Now, some good news. The Rotary, the White Plains Rotary, has this 100th anniversary with a great gala. Tell us about it, Jim.
Well, I was there. It was a great turnout. The Rotary is really a fabulous organization. They honored, it wasn't only 4 people, there were 2 people that were honorees. And one of them was the former head of the White Plains Library Foundation for several terms, Diane Tabachman, whom I know quite well because I'm on the White Plains Library Foundation board, and J. Fred Singleton, and he was also at one time on the library board, but he, I guess he runs the Laux games.
Yeah, and still coaches track at the high school. He's a great coach, great motivator of kids.
Well, he gave a fairly long speech, but he was excellent. He's a great speaker, and the event was really wonderful. And they also honored the White Plains Hospital and the White Plains Youth Bureau. Both organizations are fantastic, and the whole thing, the 100th anniversary, was really great. And the Rotary made a $25,000 donation
Thank
to
you,
the
Rotary.
White Plains Library, which I think was absolutely fabulous.
Right.
But it was a wonderful evening.
Yes. Well, John Bailey, Jim Benerofe, that's all we have for you tonight. Good night for White Plains Week.
This has been White Plains Week, news and commentary about White Plains, Westchester, and the world. The views and opinions expressed on this program were solely those of the participants. White Plains Week, produced by White Plains Citizen Net Reporter and presented on Optimum Cable Channel 76 and Verizon Fios Channel 45. You may view White Plains Week anytime on the internet at whiteplainsweek.com, youtube.com, and wpcommunitymedia.org. For White Plains Week, this is Peter Katz speaking.